Okay, in this chapter, which is chapter 11, we will discuss life course perspectives of criminality. I want you all to notice that instead of talking about theories, this particular chapter identifies this group of ideas around criminal and delinquent behavior as a perspective as opposed to a theory. And the reason why that is so is something that I'm going to explain shortly here. So there are several assumptions that guide this perspective. The first assumption is that human behavior is dynamic and changes throughout the life course. So far, we've talked a lot about human behavior as if it's static, and by static, what I mean is we've looked at human behavior as if it's a constant, as if people's behavior does not change over the course of their lifetime. But we all know, having lived on Earth now for at least 18 years at minimum, we all know that behavior of people changes as they get older, and we know that that changes as a result of a lot of different things. And so this perspective acknowledges that people do change as they get older, and it acknowledges and places value on that fact. Behavior is not static, it is dynamic. And by dynamic, what that means is it changes. People do evolve. The second assumption that's made by this perspective is that events and circumstances throughout the life course will impact individual behavior. And so, where do the changes come from in people's behavior as they get older? Well, there are life circumstances and there are life events that occur that change us and change our behavior. So, for example, going off to school, getting a job, having children, getting married, all of these lifetime markers, these milestones, all of these things can create change in our life. Even other events like death of loved ones, right? Loss of friendships, or even meeting new people, picking up a mentor. All of those are life events that change people's behaviors. And as a result of that, then we have to also start to think about criminal behavior and how criminal behavior throughout the course of the lifetime can be changed by these things as well. So, what are developmental theories? Developmental theories are explanatory models of behavior that follow individuals throughout their life course of criminal offending. People, I'm not sure what the average lifespan is nowadays, but I believe it's around 80 years old. That's the average sort of lifespan, anywhere between 70 and 80. I'll say that. So if we're going to be on this planet for 80 years at average, then criminologists want to know, how does criminal offending change throughout the course of one's lifetime? And so this particular perspective then seeks to identify how that changes. And there are specific terms that are used in this perspective. There are specific stages of a criminal career or a person's criminal behavior over the course of a lifetime that this perspective examines. The first is onset. Onset only means the beginning of a criminal career. How do people get started? What types of things tend to accompany the start of criminal behavior? How do people differ who start engaging in criminal behavior earlier as opposed to those who start to engage in criminal behavior later in life? All of those are things that are looked at in this perspective. Frequency. Frequency examines how frequently do people engage in criminal behavior. Some research has found that the more serious the crime that people commit, the less frequently they engage in it. So if you think about a serial killer, for example, serial killers tend to kill very rarely. If they do kill a person, it can be years or even decades before they kill another person. Whereas a less serious offense like shoplifting might occur far more frequently. such as once a week, once a month, even once a day. Insistence, that actually should say intensity, refers to the serious severity of crime. Duration refers to the length of a criminal career. Most people who engage in criminal behavior only do so for a short period of time, 5 years or so, even less than that, and then they stop. But then there are other offenders who will engage in crime for far long periods of time. And so your life course developmental theorists are interested in what the differences are between those two groups of people. And then finally, a huge area that is examined and explored in this perspective is the idea of desistance. And desistance means ceasing of criminal behavior, or when a person stops engaging in criminal behavior. And of course, everyone wants to know what types of things accompany a stopping or a ceasing of engaging in criminal behavior. Marriage? Is it children? Is it finding employment? We want to know these things because if we know these things, then again, it helps us to be able to fight and combat against crime. So your developmental theories then will emphasize and examine much of the evolution that offenders will experience over the course of their lifetime. And they examine these things as a criminal career. There are certain things that we know about how crime and criminal behavior develops over the course of a lifetime. Generally, individuals begin with minor offending and progress towards more serious types of crimes. Also, there are some other things that we know in terms of who is at most risk for continued violent behavior. So, for example, those individuals who have an onset or beginning of criminal career at an earlier age, what the research has found is that the earlier a person starts to engage in crime, the more likely it is that that person will engage in very serious types of crime over the course or duration of their lifetime. Other things that we know in terms of violent behavior: if at a young age a child is engaging in certain antisocial behaviors, there are certain things that suggest that that child will also develop a long and intense career in engaging in crime. So, for example, if a child at an early age is harming animals, or if a child at an early age is abused physically or sexually, or if a child at an early age tends to set things on fires, all of those are things that place a child at risk for having a criminal career that is long in duration and is intense in terms of the severity of the types of crimes committed. Now, this semester, we've already discussed, uh, well, this particular perspective, again, rests on the idea that people change over the course of a lifetime. However, there are theories that argue the exact opposite. And we've discussed that when we discussed the low self-control theory, which was created by Gottfredson and Hershey. Again, to recap on that, Gottfredson and Hershey, in their general theory of crime, or low self-control theory, argued that crime is the product of low self-control. When individuals do not have self-control and there is an opportunity to commit a crime, those individuals are at risk for engaging in crime. And one of the key controversies in that theory was a sub-argument that was made by Gottfredson and Hershey, which is that once a person, if a person does not develop self-control by age 10, then it cannot be obtained after age 10. In other words, if a person at age 10, a person does not change. And that is the exact opposite of what is argued by your developmental theorists. Hence, this is why oftentimes you'll see that the low self-control theory is referred to as a anti-developmental theory. Getting back to talking a little bit more about developmental theories, one of the most key developmental theories that was created was Sampson and Lobb's age-graded theory. In that particular theory, or that theory actually came out of data that was collected on a family called the Glukes. And what Sampson and Lobb did is this data was actually collected over the course of several generations of this particular family. And let me make a note that usually when people conduct or study developmental theories, they will use what is called longitudinal data. And longitudinal data is data that is collected over multiple time periods or multiple data points. Anyhow, going back to the Gluck data, they collected this data over the course of several generations of the Gluck family, and they measured the stability and change of these family members and their offspring. And what they found and what they observed from, again, observing this data that they collected over a period of time is that there was an emphasis on certain life events and specific life events in the members of this family were found to change the decisions to commit criminal activity amongst its different members. They also found that early antisocial tendencies, like the things that I described earlier in terms of mutilation of animals, in terms of setting fires, and other early antisocial behaviors, all of those things were found to predict criminality in the members of this family. Some of the things that they found that also played a role in criminal behavior amongst these family members were the actual structural or environmental factors surrounding these family members. So, for example, the family situation, the family's poverty level, as well as the type of neighborhood that they lived in, all of those things impacted the behavior of those family members or their criminality over the course of their lifetime. Other things that contributed to their behavior over the course of their lifetime were uh, what are called turning points in their lifetime, like marriage, getting into the military, finding employment, or even having children. Those things were found to contribute towards desistance in criminal behavior. And all you have to do is just think about, why is it that having children, for example, why would that impact whether or not a person commits crime? Well, think about it. Usually, when people have children, they're no longer just living for themselves. They have to be there for their children. And when that happens, people are more likely to think more carefully about whether or not they engage in certain types of risky behaviors that may jeopardize them being in their child's life. And I can also say the same thing is true for marriage as well as employment and the military career. There was also someone else who contributed greatly to the developmental theories and life course perspective, and his name was Moffat. Moffat created what's called the developmental theories of crime. And what he did, what his major contribution is that he identified that there are two types of offenders. There are what are called limited offenders, and adolescent limited offenders make up the bulk of people who commit crimes. These people tend to engage in criminal and delinquent behavior during their youth or adolescent years, anywhere between 13 and 17. Usually, the types of behaviors between that age range is pretty much normal teenage behavior. Not really serious types of offenses, very minor types of offenses that are infrequent in nature. And usually, when teenagers commit these types of offenses, they're usually in the company of their peers, other kids who are at the same age. Again, my argue the bulk of the offenders or criminals or delinquents, whatever you want to call them, are adolescent limited. They tend to stop engaging in crime after they leave those adolescent years. However, the second group that Moffat identified was a group that he called life course persistent offenders. And he argued that life course persistent offenders make up about 4 to 8% of all offenders. They tend to commit the vast amount of serious crimes. So all of your serious crimes. So think about things like extreme property damage, or extreme violent types of crimes, or even your huge and impactful white collar crimes. Those types of crimes tend to be committed by individuals who belong in the life course persistent group. These people begin offending early in life, prior to the point of becoming teenagers, and their offending stretched out over the course of their lifetime and continue to get worse and worse. Moffat also found that most people who were life course persistent tended to have serious neurological or brain issues, as well as uh, having some type of background living in a disadvantaged environment. So, in terms of policy implications, if we know what we know about developmental and life course theories is true, and there's some validity behind what we know about that, what are some of the things that we can do to alleviate or remedy these issues? Well, anything involving prenatal and perinatal care could help. So, for example, health care for pregnant women, interventions for drug addicted, alcoholic pregnant mothers, flagging high risk pregnancies, or babies who had difficult deliveries, or providing early educational experiences in the form of preschool for children. All of those are early intervention strategies that could, if done early enough, intervene with the child's life to set that child up for a positive trajectory that does not involve criminal or delinquent behavior. This is all I had to share with you all for this particular chapter. As always, please read over this chapter and take notes, and send me any emails with any questions that you may have.